Hello, I'm Peggy Allen.
And I'm Amanda Kiewit. And you're watching the Junction Fiber Mill Millcast.
Yeah, I've lost track. Are we at 22?
22 or 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's getting up there. It's it's hilarious. I in my usual turtleneck and you in short sleeves.
I'm committed to it being like fully summer. It was in the 80s.
It was crazy warm.
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
It was. Yeah, it really...
We're speaking in past tense.
Now it looks like it's about to start pouring, maybe thunderstorming.
Right, and it's cooled off a lot. We need the rain. Much as I love all that hot weather, there was no rain in it, and we need the rain now.
Yeah, Cody, my husband, who's a volunteer firefighter, was really worried about the potential for wildfires in the past week, which I wouldn't have thought of, but I guess because nothing is green yet, it's all just dry. So once the snow goes away with all that heat, I guess wildfires are
like a tinderbox.
Yeah,
I had never even thought of that.
Yeah, I know. Just one more thing to worry about, but it didn't happen. They didn't get any calls.
Good.
So
good.
Hopefully the rain comes soon and the green grows.
Yeah.
For many reasons, but
right.
For the fires.
Yeah, but you're pretending it's still hot out. This is very cute.
Thank you. This is the petite knit. I think it's like the summer.
Honest to God, they should be paying Amanda.
I know. I'm just a little obsessed, you guys. But I knit this a while ago. It's I knit it with a linen yarn that I bought somewhere random on Etsy, and it's held 2 strands together. And I actually dyed it with. This was when I was going through my natural dye phase.
Yeah.
I dyed it with acorns.
Oh, you're kidding!
Yeah, so I took some acorns and I made like an acorn tea, and then I put all the yarn in there.
Are you breaking up and mashing the acorns?
I think I just put them in there. I think even with their little caps too, and you're just making like a tea basically, and putting the fiber in. I probably pre-treated it with I think aluminum acetate is what you treat cellulosic fibers with. I don't know. This was right before the mill. I was like real into natural dye, and then I started the mill project.
And be fair, you're still into it. You just haven't found the time to go back to it because you got a few things on your plate.
Exactly, but
what color was the linen? I mean, was it just an off-white?
Yeah, it was a white linen yarn, and yeah, so it turned this sort of lovely silver.
It's really lovely.
Thank you.
I would never have thought acorn though.
Yeah,
very cool.
I can't remember. I might have actually added a little bit of iron to it afterwards. Iron, when you add it to natural dye, usually like saddens the color, so it makes it like a little, like it's how you get a lot of the, you turn yellows into more like olives, and you turn reds into purples and stuff like that. So I might have done a little. So, anyways, what are you wearing?
Oh, I think I've worn this before. It's a vest that a classic one where I kind of made it up as I went along.
Yeah.
Years ago. And
love the cables.
Yeah, my friend Kay Shumway had a similar one, and I was like, Kay, that is really nice. I think I could figure that out.
Is it your wool? From your sheep?
No, I don't even know it's a single ply, so I don't know.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to dye it. I'm in this thing now of knitting something and then dyeing it. I haven't done it yet, but this would be a perfect example of what would happen if I just submerged it and dyed it. I'll get around to it.
Yeah, you got it.
But
also a lot of things.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of things going on. Yeah, we're, as some of you guys know, I've been putting up some pictures. We are right in the middle of lambing. And you know what? The warm weather has been great for it, because Todd and I have been taking turns going up at the middle of the night, and it's not so bad when it's, a balmy 60 degrees outside. Because I've done some middle of the nights up there, where it's, 25, 30 degrees. In any case,
whipping winds.
And yes, and whipping winds. But so far we have 3 sets of twins and 2 singles.
Okay.
And the girls rule.
Oh, really?
We have 1 ram.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's great because we have a number of people who are interested in buying some Savage Heart Farm ewe lambs for breeding. Yeah. And that just gives me such joy to kind of get this breed out in the area. And nobody wants a ram. They all, they want ewes that they can then go on to breed. So it's really good.
That's great. So you're about halfway?
Not quite. We've got 9 more ewes to go. Everybody's looking healthy though.
Good.
So knock on metal here. It's good. Last night I got a good night's sleep. Todd did the middle of the night check, and it was good that he did because he went up at 3 a.m. and one of the twins had gotten on the other side of a gate. And so when he got up there, this little, 4-day-old lamb is squunched up to the gate, and the mom is squunched up right next to her. It was very cute. It happens. They go exploring where they shouldn't.
Yes.
But tonight I'll be on for tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another wacky week here at the mill.
Yeah, a little bit.
That'll be good.
You had a great weekend.
It was so fun. My daughter turned 1 yesterday, and so we threw a big party for her.
Yes, you did.
I put the amount of time necessary into planning it, and I had a really fun time with it. And
she cooked the hell out of it.
I did a lot of cooking. Well, we looked at her schedule, and I was just going to cater it, and then I got cheap with it. And I was like, we have nothing going on all weekend. Surely I can whip up food. But we had over 30 people RSVP. So we looked at our windowsill, which is where we keep our chicken eggs from our chickens. And they finally started, after, a winter of kind of taking a hiatus, they've started laying in earnest recently. So we were just overflowing with eggs, about to find a home for them. And then I was like, aha, we will just make everyone eggs this weekend. So we used about 3 dozen eggs. And it was great. We had plenty of food. I made some galettes. We made 3 types of cupcakes.
The cupcake, I had the carrot cake cupcake. Oh my God,
those were the favorite.
Absolutely.
There was only 2 left of those.
But tell them where you held it. This is only in Vermont.
Yeah.
Let me just say.
Yeah, we held it at our local schoolhouse. So there's like traditional back in the day one room schoolhouses. It's right up the street from our house, and it is just a great space for our little community.
And it's been renovated. It's fantastic.
It's awesome, and we're trying to encourage more community members to use it, because then we can continue to get funding and keep it up to date. But I just thought we do not have room for 30 people, and I wasn't sure if we could have this party outside, or it could have been really cold. It snowed that day last year, I remember well. But so we held it at the schoolhouse, and it was just fabulous.
Yeah.
And Maeve was so cute.
Yes,
she was cranky most of the day, as kids tend to be, but she was wearing a couple of things that I'm excited to share.
Yeah, you gotta show this.
So the first one I'll share is the crown that I made her. So this is her little birthday crown.
Unbelievable.
I'll show it. So it's got her name. And then I used some scrap wool from the mill this is my first ever needle felting attempt. So I needle felted some flowers, and I found, I got some felts from a local craft store, and
that is so freaking
did some little embroidery, and then I just found a pink ribbon, which just
I had to ask, have you seen this, or did you just
it's totally
it's a thing?
It's a very Pinteresty thing.
Okay.
I saw it on Instagram or something, and I just thought, someday I want to do it, but I thought for sure I wouldn't actually get around, because it took some time. This is what I did. I didn't knit last week. I did this instead.
Oh, adorable.
And I was so pleased with it. It was one of those crafts. When I was done with it, I was like, this is so pleasing. And the kid wore it. She wore it for a good amount of time.
And
you'll see some pictures.
Yeah.
She looked like the princess, so I was very pleased about that. And then she also, I'm going to segue into talking about Dinny.
Yeah.
So you saw her last week on the Millcast, and the next day she came in to sort of shadow and see what we were doing at the mill.
It was terrific. She's amazing, and I think it was an eye opener for her on some of how we were doing some things and how some of the equipment works that no one had told her about.
Yes,
like the ratch. On the spinner, there's a bar that goes up and down depending on the length of the fiber. She had no idea.
Right. I think it was really helpful for her.
Yeah.
But it was also really fun for us to have a visitor from New Zealand.
Yeah,
She came
absolutely.
all the way here to see us. I mean, she came at least from California to here.
Yeah, she was seeing her son.
Yeah. But she came bearing gifts the next day.
Did.
So I wanted to show you. This is what Maeve wore at her birthday.
How freaking cute is this?
It's got frosting on it now. I need to wash it. But although she did a pretty good job keeping it clean. This is Dinny knit this with some alpaca.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
And it looked really cute for her birthday, and I kind of matched her wearing some yellow. And then she also knit this one out of, get this, possum mixed with merino. And she said it's a thing in New Zealand. People are knitting with possum fiber, like opossums. And
that's really
I guess
cute.
the fiber is hollow, so it's really warm. So she wore this the day before her party, but it's nice. She doesn't have any short sleeve sweaters, so now
Adorable.
She has 2, and I didn't have to knit them, so I'm very happy about that.
That was so nice of her to do.
It was so nice.
I got a very good bar of chocolate from her.
Yeah.
So it was a
and
win-win.
I didn't get anything.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
it goes to the kid.
I know.
Yeah, so it's been a busy weekend.
Busy weekend, busy
Yeah.
week prior, and this week we're not going to chat too much about the
Right.
mill because we have a really exciting interview to share with you.
Absolutely.
We are talking with, well, I did a little interview with Sophie Tanhauser. We've been previewing this for weeks, so we're really excited. Today's the day. She is the author of Worn, A People's History of Clothing. And Sophie is she teaches writing at
The Pratt Institute.
And she originally, grew up in this area and went on to write this amazing book, which we're going to discuss in detail. So hopefully you've already read it, and if you haven't, maybe this will inspire you to do so.
Okay, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. Well, joining me today here over Zoom.
Thanks. I'm really excited to speak with you.
So first of all, the book is great. I thought it was an awesome history. I mean, the subtitle, A People's History of Clothing. I thought it really had a wide variety of sort of, channels that you went into about basically all things, not only clothing, but fabric production and, the environment. And there's a lot in the book. So, I'm trying to think of how to narrow this down for this interview. And I have a few questions for you, but I just wanted to start with what sort of inspired you to write the book?
Well, I think that the inspiration partly came from the love I have for clothing and just the pleasure involved in dressing and in sewing and in thrift shopping and as I got older, in weaving and applique and things like that. It's a real joy for me to think about dressing and dressing others. I'm a person who is always on the lookout in thrift stores for my friends and family. It's just a pleasurable act for me to think about garments. They're a huge source of joy for me. And then as I got older, I think I started to notice a kind of degradation in quality of clothing that I was seeing in thrift stores, especially because I think thrift stores are sort of time capsules that show us a few decades at least of production techniques and countries and locales and materials. So I came upon a sort of frustration and a kind of anger ultimately as I began to attach what I was seeing as a kind of aesthetic degradation to a series of structural problems that I thought it would be really worthwhile to investigate. And I think I sort of came to the conclusion that many people had done a lot of really interesting scholarship and reporting on things like sweatshops or the environmental costs of cotton or the history of the British in India. But I wanted to sort of bring some of these strands together so that people could start to see the picture that I was seeing, which is that the story of fabric and clothing is really the story of imperialism. And we can't really understand the way we are dressed today unless we understand that history. And I wanted to find a way to draw these environmental, like you said, social, labor, aesthetic questions together into one place. And that's what became the book, Worn.
Yeah, and it's definitely that. I feel like my head exploded. I learned so much. I had to take it very slowly as I read it because there was just so much I was underlining and highlighting and getting enraged about, and then feeling, at the end, a little bit of hope as well. But I thought it might be interesting to just sort of walk through. You separate the book into 5 main sections. So you've got linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and finally wool. So I'd love to hear you just speak a little bit about those 5 sections, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
So the first being linen. So tell us about linen.
Yeah, so the story of linen in the book is really a story about women's labor. And it's not the case that exclusively women are involved in textile labor. Of course, there's a lot of men involved too. And certainly a lot of one of the things, this is a digression, but one of the things that I noticed when I was traveling in India and in China was I would get to the end of the day and feel like feel like I've been hanging out with men all day. Like I was always in some car or some waiting room with a bunch of men. And I was like, why is this? And then it dawned on me that the men owned all the stuff, like all the factories. So it's very cool to see a woman factory owner standing before me or on Zoom across from me, because that's very much the minority. You know, like most of these big textile factories are owned by men in China and India, but the workers are overwhelmingly female. So this is kind of the contemporary state of play where I mean, there's different statistics, but about 2/3 of the global workforce in textiles, people, you know, different. It's a big statistic to try to arrive at, but it's a majority female workforce, let's say, and historically there's a huge connection there as well. So I wanted to start to speak about, well, sort of two things in the section on linen. One is what a huge trauma it was to have textile labor become an industrial process. And so in order to do that, I wanted to start out with the pre-industrial process of making textiles. And the oldest form of textiles, archaeologists believe it's a really hard thing to figure out because textiles break down so quickly, but there's a general consensus that the oldest forms of textiles are vegetal fibers like linen or flax or hemp. It's that kind of textile that is far older than silk or wool or cotton. So I wanted to start sort of with the archaeological record and to think through some of the earliest period of textile making. And I also wanted to connect to New England, which is where I grew up, and which is a really interesting case study because in the kind of early colonial era, the colonists were making linen textiles. They were growing flax. They were using hand tools to remove the husks, to draw the fibers, you know, to comb the fibers, to spin and to weave the textile. And that all got displaced, you know, in the late 1700s, early 1800s with cotton textiles and industrialization. But it was a kind of a place for me to look at home production and small scale production and women's labor, and then to think about like the huge upset that occurred with industrialization on the level of who owns the tools, who owns the land, who owns the labor, basically, of the people who are making garments.
Yeah. So it's sort of it's a more of a historical deep dive that focuses on the labor side of things, and I certainly found just the information about the women's traditional role as sort of the garment makers in the household to be fascinating. And like you said, it's really interesting to read as a mill owner. You know, both Peggy and myself are women, and I think I haven't been able to really articulate, not nearly as well as you have, but just sort of this interesting feeling about what that means for the mill and for ourselves to sort of be taking that back, and yet at the same time, you know, working in this economy where we're doing something that's a little bit unique compared to most where most of fiber production is being made, which is primarily overseas. And it was really interesting and felt very rewarding, I guess, to read that, and you know, personally a little bit. And so then you move into cotton, which took, you know, a big swing towards environmental issues, is how I read it. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how that section is structured.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge environmental piece to that. And that was, I think, part of what drew me in. And the section starts in Texas, in Lubbock, Texas, where we produce a lot of cotton in the US. And it's hugely water intensive, the way that cotton is grown in Lubbock and elsewhere in the world. And in Texas, the water is coming from the Oglala Aquifer, which is slowly being drawn down to the point where it will probably disappear in our lifetimes, which is alarming, to say the least. And then I kind of move back in time from Lubbock to the story of the arrival of the British East India Company on the subcontinent that's now India, and sort of tell the story of how once upon a time, before this kind of encroachment, India was actually the largest exporter of cotton textiles in the world. It was Indian textiles that were the most desirable, hand spun textiles. And in talking about India, I also talk about cotton as a small scale crop. So a time when farmers were growing cotton alongside their food crops in Africa and India and South America. So just like with flax being grown alongside oats, for instance, prior to this imperial kind of juncture, people were growing cotton in their vegetable gardens, basically. So that was another kind of point of rupture that I talked about, and sort of the way in which there was a political intervention, aka, the British taking over ultimately, first economically and then politically, the Indian subcontinent, combined with this mechanical intervention and this series of machines that made it possible to spin cotton into thread and then weave thread into a textile. And it was really those two combined that produced the Industrial Revolution. As I sort of think that we think of the Industrial Revolution as being about steam engines and trains and men, but I think it's really a story of the revolution in fabric making. Ultimately, I think that's the economic underpinning of the Industrial Revolution. And I think the story there is not just about machines and technical innovation, but it's also about colonial violence, really. And that's also the section in which I talk about the transatlantic slave trade, because as I think most Americans know, cotton was the major crop in the South. And so it's sort of all of these things coming together: slave labor in the US, the kind of displacement of small producers in India, and then this technology that produces the global market as we kind of now understand it, originally with textiles. Like, that to me is the beginning of real globalization. And it's such a violent story, and it's such a disturbing story on the level of human beings, and also on the level of the way that the land is used, as you mentioned, and just the kind of impact and what we're willing to do. And so then the last chapter of that section takes place in China, where as if things couldn't get more depressing, there are actual internment camps where there's a lot of basically slave labor occurring among Uyghur people who are interned in these camps in Western China. And so I wanted to write about Western China even before some of this stuff, really disturbing stuff, began coming out in the news about Uyghur concentration camps, because for a couple of few decades now, the way in which water is being used in Western China has been something that strikes me as very concerning, because it's basically like, okay, let's take a really dry region, like a semi-arid region where people have been doing agriculture by literally just collecting like snow melt, and let's do this really intensive cotton ag that is going to rely on a ton of water. And that kind of willingness to create, basically to desertify, I don't really know how to pronounce that, but to make what was the desert into desert in Western China, kind of goes back even further than the stuff we're seeing now with the internment camps. So to me, it was sort of like a story about, if we're willing to do this to the land that people live on, like, what are we then willing to do to the people who live there? So I think they really go together, that those kind of two calculations and willingnesses to reduce people or the land into just, to kind of outputs. So
yeah, it's extremely extractive. I mean, and like you said, very very depressing to read, and I would say eye-opening and anger inducing, and it certainly left both Peg and I feeling like questioning consumption of cotton even more than we already had, because it seems like it's certainly not a problem that we have solved through organic or labeling things. It's just continuing in one form or another, whether it's slavery, like you said, and the human cost or the environmental cost. And it just was really eye-opening to hear about the legacy in India as well, that it continues to have such wide-ranging impacts there. So the silk section, kind of, started to talk more about fashion and fashion industry. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, since we've been like talking about the emotional trajectory of the book, I think partly Silk was placed where it was because I wanted to give people like a breather from it in a way. Not that it's
Let's
all
talk
very,
about the French a little bit.
yeah, like let's talk about Louis Couture's and let's talk about, frivolity. I mean, but of course, like I really tried to make, pleasure be part of the whole experience. I don't know if I succeeded, but I hope people aren't listening and getting the sense that this is going to be just like a slog. So the silk section, as we've said a little bit, talks about fashion, and to me that has a lot to do with fantasy. So it was sort of like thinking through how deep a desire, like getting back to my original kind of love of clothing and what
Yep.
it promises us and this kind of transformation that's associated with it, or the kind of way in which we do become a character when we get dressed. So I focused on first kind of France because there are scholars who really trace a certain amount of what we now understand as fashion to this particular historical moment and place. And a lot of interesting scholarship has been done on this by Kimberly Chrisman Campbell, who I've read and watched her videos, and people are interested in this period might enjoy her. But basically, I wanted to involve some pleasure, and there really is a way in which that moment in France kind of connected to a time when feudalism was giving way to capitalism, basically. And so it became possible to change station in a very real way. And
Yep.
historically in Europe, there had been laws that kind of made sure that people didn't wear silk unless they were aristocrats, for instance. Like there was strict rules on what you were allowed to wear. And these kind of started to collapse in this period so that a rich merchant's wife could wear a silk dress. And so then what does that do to the aristocratic wife? Now she has to go and like find a way to distinguish herself as being socially superior to the merchant's wife. And then the merchant's wife has to copy that. And so then she has to run faster and faster. So there are scholars who think this is kind of like what escalates the need to change over what people are wearing, like much more rapidly. So not over the course of centuries or decades, but over the course of years or even months. And so that was kind of an interesting story that I wanted to tell. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about China and silk, because it's a really magical and interesting textile that really does kind of, for most of its history, exist only in China. So to really get into that and think about what it means to have, I mean, to use a cocoon to make, so like it is kind of like has a mythical quality to it no matter how you think about it. So I went to China. I visited some silk factories, and also kind of discovered this really sad story, which is that in the area of the world where like silk began and where the best mulberry trees grow. So silkworms only eat mulberry leaf, and mulberry leaves grow really well in certain climates, including in the kind of Yangtze River Valley and the Delta region. So in that region, there's been enormous economic growth, largely due to textiles and also now other kinds of manufacturing. But all of this manufacturing has threatened the mulberry trees, so it's impossible now to grow silk in its kind of original home. But I wanted to include some of the Chinese history as well, so that's there. And then I think the last chapter of Silk talks about kind of the birth of American advertising in the 20s, and thinks through how American advertisers really latched on to this kind of mythical quality and really the legacy of Louis Couture's and Orientalist ideas about, luxury. And so sort of some of the stuff that's happening in the preceding chapters, how did that kind of then enter like the lifeblood of American advertising and industry? And that can be like a little bit more of a quite cynical story of kind of convincing consumers that this now mass manufactured garment, this is also the chapter in which I talk about the kind of birth of mass manufactured garments, which is largely connected to the story of the sewing machine.
Yeah.
And how that becomes like something that marketers take and run with in terms of convincing people that a garment is going to change your life, and whatever it is that you're dissatisfied about, what you
Right.
need is some new clothes.
That you can buy your way basically to more satisfaction. I thought that was such
Yes.
a good line that you had in there. And it really segues well into the synthetics movement as well, and the really, really mass producing um, boon that happened. And I found one section that I just want to make sure to include. I keep coming back to the statistic mentally, which is as recently as 1997, over 40% of all apparel purchased in the US had been produced domestically. In 2012, that figure was less than 3%. And for me, I was born in 91. So as a child, to think that most of my clothing that my parents bought without any, being very attached to this, movement toward back to the, US manufacturing, but just normal clothing that they would have bought anywhere would probably be, at least nearly half made in the US. And today, less than 3%, which means people like myself, who's out shopping for baby clothes and stuff like that, it's so much harder to find anything made in the US, or it seems like such a luxury these days. And that just really floored me that you almost didn't have to think about it in less than my lifetime ago, and now it's almost lost completely. So I want to just make sure to highlight that, and I'm being cognizant of time at the moment, so I don't want to glide past synthetics too quickly, but I really want to make sure we talk about wool.
Yes. Yeah, no,
So
I think I just will echo what you said, which is that it was also shocking to me to learn what a recent story the collapse of the American garment industry really is. And for me,
yeah,
it was like it was kind of a haphazard thing where, because I was born in 84, so I had to like clean out a crawl space at some point and discovered all of my junior high clothing, and it was all US made. And it was from TJ Maxx in Falmouth, Massachusetts. It
it
wasn't like,
wasn't like artisanal, like small
yeah.
batch
So that's,
stuff.
long story short, that story of how this came to pass over the course of the second half of the 20th century is really the story that I tell in the synthetic section.
And
But
the
let's have a,
geopolitical like reasons that it got there, which was just fascinating, and I think really speaks against this message we get from a lot of places, which is like consumers need to choose made in the US. Like it really is a little bit bigger of a story that's more of a systemic issue, which I really appreciated and felt again more like it helped me realize that probably we have more power toward changing systems than just shopping. Like shopping made in the US is great, and I think people should do it if they can afford it, or shopping natural fibers, but there's really a big political issue here that is bigger than any one person's purchases is going to fix.
absolutely, it is. Yeah, it's a kind of Cold War story, and it is a truly global political story. So yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. But
But
let's
wool.
get into wool. Because I was thinking about almost at the beginning, jumping ahead to wool, when you were speaking about being a mill owner and you
Hmm.
have this little machine behind you. And
Yeah.
I do in the section on wool kind of speak to and investigate, handmade traditions, but I also really think about and write about small machines and the wonder of small machines, because I
Hmm.
think that the machine itself is not the problem. And I think that sometimes, a lot of people who are involved in weaving or spinning or sewing, including myself, really value the tactility of it and the handcraft element of it. And I think there is really a place for that, certainly in my life and in the world. But that doesn't mean that, for me anyways, that the machine is the enemy, because I think that machines well deployed are really part of the solution, and are
Hmm.
a real kind of excitement for me in particular, and for many of the people that I spoke to.
Yeah.
In India, also in the US. So I'll give an example from India, actually, 'cause it's a little counterintuitive because it's not a story of wool. But I met a man who ran a company called Microspin, and he had invented this little suite of machines that could fit like in a garage that allowed a cotton farmer to turn like really small quantities of cotton into thread. So that what that meant was that the farmer could adjust the machine and didn't have to grow only one varietal of cotton, but could rather grow whatever would grow well on his
Right.
land or land. So if you cater the machine to the farmer, it changes everything instead of having the seed need to work backwards from the machine, which is really the story of the cotton gin and the kind of the machinery that built the Industrial Revolution. So there are many, many people I learned as I was researching this that are really investigating what kinds of small scale machines and small scale systems can start to relink communities and not force us to transport, raw and finished materials across oceans several times before we use them. And to me, that's really a point of excitement and a point of light at the end of the book, because there's so much happening already. There's so much already in motion. And it sounds like you're really a part of that.
Yeah, it's cool. And certainly the people that watch this Millcast too, just because, I think what I'm hearing is like there's just so many levels of connecting back to our garments that you support, and the work that you've done really supports, as well as just, whether it's just being more conscious of where you're purchasing your clothes and what the supply chain looks like, or, making your own garments through weaving or knitting, or growing, all the way down to growing your own fiber, both plants and animals. And, for us, it's working with local sheep farmers and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And so I guess I wanted to leave on a note toward the future. So what kind of an impact do you think that this book will have, or what kind of impact do you hope that your book will have?
That's a good question. And I don't know exactly how to answer it, but I will say it's been over a year now since the book came out in hardcover. And one of the things that I have found really delightful about it is the way in which it's already put me in touch with a lot of people who are like you, or, people I run into on Instagram who are really already involved in this kind of work. And I hope that it also brings people together, because this is like a network. It's a network that we use to make textiles with. So I think that on the level of just sheerly connecting people who might be interested in working towards interesting textile projects or solutions, but also for me, I think there's a value just as a reader in something that maybe has been bothering me for a long time, but I haven't quite put my finger on it. And just reading something and saying like, I knew it. I knew that somehow. And readers have told me that they're like, I had a feeling about this kind of, like, this didn't quite sit right with me, but it was helpful to like read this history and understand that feeling was justified. So I think as a writer, to me, that's kind of my dream come true, is if I can just give somebody the feeling that I really like when I read, and I get the sense that the thing that I sort of knew in a way but couldn't quite trace was real. Like there was a real
It's very validating, for sure.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I think that can be clarifying, and to me that's helpful.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And that's, I guess, the feeling I want to say this book will definitely bring readers who are, sort of like-minded and interested in where their garments come from, or even people who aren't and just had no idea. I think that would be a similar feeling there too. So Sophie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Fascinating.
So fascinating. I think everyone should read this book and open your eyes a little bit more to what goes into the garments that we're all wearing.
Yeah, and the price.
Yes.
The environmental price, the labor.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
She's a good storyteller.
Yes, she is. And she did a heck of a lot of research and traveling around for that book.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's most of the Millcast. We do have our April open house coming up
On Friday.
On Friday. So if you haven't made it to an open house, come on down. We're gonna. I don't know why they're getting to feel very party-esque.
Yeah.
You know, we've had good crowds, and it's a chance to see the equipment, and we move all the inventory that we've got into the back of the mill here, and
We'll have some
it's a lot
small
of fun.
skeins that you can't
Yep.
get anywhere else, and probably some roving for sale as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And if anybody wants to make their own flower crown, we have a lot of colorful fiber around.
That's right.
That we'll sell you for pretty cheap. So
Absolutely.
come on by if you're a needle felter or interested in getting started with that, and we can help you out too.
Yeah, we'd love to see you.
3 to 5 on Friday.
Yeah. We'll see you later.
Bye.